Hi, I'm Anne and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be wrapping up the books that I read in August of 2021. I only managed to read 7 books this month, which is partially because I was just so busy, partially because I feel like a lot of the books I read this month were not great books. Pretty much all of the books that I have to talk about today, I gave either 2 or 3 stars. There's only one that I gave 4 stars. No 5 stars. Which is unfortunate. So like most of the books I read this month were either okay or just good but not great. So I'm going to go through the books I read from 2 star to 4 star. And then after I'm done with that, I'm going to be giving a short TBR for September. I don't plan to read that many books in September because I am very, very overwhelmed with school right now. So the first book I read this month was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. So Michaelides wrote the Silent Patient as well, which I read last month or a couple months ago, I don't remember, but with that one I had very similar feelings that I did with this one, where the premise was interesting but the execution wasn't that great. But I will say that book compared to this book is just 100 times better. In fact, I watched Murphy Napier's review of this book and she kind of just summed up all my issues with it. So I'm going to link her video in the description because she goes into it much more elaborately than I'm going to go in this video. Mariana is this psychologist working in England, and she is contacted by her niece, who she kind of raised as a daughter along with her husband, that Zoe, the niece, her friend, was killed at Cambridge University. So Mariana goes to help figure out like who did the killing. There's also some more killings that go along. It's basically a murder mystery that is centered around kind of the feel of dark academia. But the problem is it is possibly the worst murder mystery I have read in my entire life. And I'm not sure if Michaelides just doesn't know how to write a murder mystery, but even the basics of like the 1, 2, 3s of writing a murder mystery, he doesn't even seem to know. Mariana is one of the worst mystery protagonists. She becomes fixated on Fosquet, this guy who has these girls under his wing that he takes and mentors, which seems kind of weird and creepy because they're all the prettiest girls in his class. But she's like fixated on him being the murderer, and pretty much all the other guys, all of which are creepy, she just dismisses them as not bad. There's so many random red herrings that aren't really red herrings. They make no sense to be red herrings. I will say the twist at the end was really good, which is the only reason I'm giving this 2 stars instead of 1 star. But the way it came out and the way it was concluded was just so horrible. So the next book I talked about in my reading vlog for 2 weeks ago, and that is Angels and Demons by Dan Brown. This is the first book of the Robert Langdon series. It's kind of adventure, mystery, secret codes, thriller. Pretty much it follows Robert Langdon, who is this symbologist. So he studies symbols within different faiths and different cultures throughout history, and he is brought in when this brilliant scientist is mysteriously murdered, and the symbol of the Illuminati is burned onto his chest. So Langdon is led to the Vatican in this massive conspiracy to take over the Catholic Church is the best way to describe this book. So I originally gave this 3 stars. When I finished it in that last vlog, I said I would give it 3 stars, but after thinking about it more and more, I realized this is definitely a 2-star book. I did not like this book the more I think about it. Writers are not obligated to write on certain topics. You know, you can say there are exceptions, like for example with Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle. He continued to write the Sherlock Holmes series even if he wasn't really loving it because they were publishing. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the choice to write on a certain topic. Dan Brown chose to write on Christian topics, you know, whether it is examining the Catholic Church in this book. I believe he also examines the Catholic Church in the Da Vinci Code, but I haven't read it yet. Not only Catholic theology he examines, but also Christian theology, which to me says if you're examining something for an entire book, that means you have an interest in it. As I pointed out in my vlog that I did for this book, I did a little bit of a rant review for this because It feels like Dan Brown did a lot of research on how the Vatican works, how the basics of Catholicism work, but when it comes to understanding any of the theology, he just doesn't understand any of it. And for me, when you're writing on a topic that is as complex as religion, it's very disrespectful to just kind of say, oh, I'm going to analyze this topic, tear it apart, when I don't really understand it at all. And that's how this book feels to me. And yes, there's some really good thrilling parts and aspects that I'm like, oh, this was just perfect. But you can't get so much wrong about the real world and still create a good book. Now, I know there's a lot of people who are out there that love this book. In fact, there are a few people that were in my comment section that were like, I remember really enjoying this book. So I'm not going to sit there and say this is a horrible book, but I think there's an issue with someone writing about a topic who seriously misunderstands 90% about that topic. And that's my concern with this book, and that's why I downgraded it to 2 stars instead of 3 stars. Also, the more I thought about the ending, the more I realized how overly convoluted and ridiculous it was. I won't get into spoilers, but it was just a little bit too much. I'm definitely going to still read The Da Vinci Code, and I hope I enjoy that one more. The third book is actually one that I read for my book club, and there's The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. This is a book I've owned for a while, and I've been wanting to read. How do I sum up this book? It is a tale of mothers and daughters scoping between China and America. So basically it follows 8 women, I'd say, 4 mothers, 4 daughters who are of Chinese descent. Most of the mothers immigrated directly when they were young from China, and all of the daughters were born in America with very different ideals because they grew up, in a sense, Americanized, whereas the Chinese women grew up in a very different time. I gave this book 2 stars, and I feel so bad about that because this is a book that I've heard so many good things about, and I feel like it is universally loved, so I have a feeling that my opinion may be rather unpopular. I think it tells a very important tale of the hardships that immigrants go through, like going to a new country, leaving behind everything you know and trying to fit into a new society. I can't imagine going through that. This book took on a topic that is very fascinating in general, but for some reason it made it so boring. And I think there were 2 issues for that, and they are kind of intertwined together. One is there are way too many perspectives and stories. So basically each chapter is told from a different perspective, either one of the mothers or one of the daughters. Because of that, I never felt like I could understand one perspective because I was just moving on to the next one. And I think it would have been slightly better if their stories had vastly varied. The problem was all these women's stories were pretty much exactly the same. The mothers all came from China. They were all pretty relatively impoverished. I wouldn't say that any of them were super wealthy. They were all poor. And they often were forced into marriages. They grew up in a very harsh environment. And then you have the daughters kind of misunderstanding their mothers, being very part of the Americanized feel, not really having close relationships with their mothers, and kind of being part of America. That was the case with every single one of the daughters. And because of that, I could never connect with any of them because I was like, well, this one is exactly the same as the other one, just the circumstances are slightly different with the story. So I just like that. I think you could have told a powerful message with just one mother and one daughter and have that be the entire book, or have their stories vastly vary. Instead of having them all have about the same background, all about the same personalities, have them be wildly different. Have one come from a very wealthy family while one comes from a very poor family, and contrast that difference when it comes to immigrating to America. Everything was the same. And while the basic story was an important message, once you repeat that basic story like 8 times, it becomes a not very interesting message anymore. So yeah, I gave it 2 stars, and I was a little bit disappointed. So now we are going to the 3 stars and up. First, I'm going to talk about series that technically I gave one of the books 3 stars and one of the books 4 stars. That's the High Society Lady Detective series. I have continued on in it. The third book is the Egyptian Antiquities murder, and that one I gave it 3 stars. And then the fourth book is Murder in Black Tie, which I just finished a couple days ago, and that one I gave 4 stars. The Egyptian Antiquities murder wasn't as great. It's probably so far my least favorite book in the series. Because they're short and fun, I still enjoyed it. But when it came to the mystery, it felt a little bit too lucky, the solution. And I like when all the pieces fall in place for a murder mystery. You say, oh my gosh, how did I miss that? That just fits together so perfectly. And with the first 2 books, that's exactly how I felt. But with the 4th book of the series, Murder in Black Tie, I really loved it. This series follows all of this woman who is from a wealthy family in England, but she doesn't have much money, so she has to get a job, and she ends up doing discreet inquiries, possibly, and finding herself in murders. I mean, she takes on mystery cases, pretty much, and needs to solve them. And it's a very fun, light series. I'm just really enjoying this series because it's very light, especially when I am having to read a lot of denser books for school currently. So it's nice to just fall into a nice, cozy murder mystery. It's also set in 1930s, so I love anything having to do with history. So the next book I gave 3 stars, and that is The Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I saw Michael K. Vaughn's review for this a while ago. I don't remember how long ago he did this, but it sounded so interesting, and it's been so long since I've sat down and just read a really short, light, fun, I would say classic sci-fi or fantasy, and I really enjoyed it. There are definitely a lot of ridiculous things about it. Basically, it follows John Carter, who is this man from the US of A. He magically kind of travels to this Mars, where there are this infighting between different groups, different alien species. It's a really fun pulp fiction book that was so popular like in the 20s and 30s. And there's a lot of very likable characters. For example, Wola is this massive beast that John Carter befriends, and it's just like so cute. It's like a massive puppy dog, and now I really want like a 10-foot tall massive puppy dog. There's this other guy that is one of the green aliens, Tars Tarkas, who is kind of a leader in the green alien group, and I just really enjoyed his friendship when it came to John Carter. It's also interesting to see a lot of the cliches that you see in a lot of sci-fi, but to realize that, I mean, it wasn't cliche when Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote this book, because he kind of created a lot of the like cliches that became so commonly seen over the next few decades in sci-fi. So it was a fun overall read, and I really enjoyed it. The last book that I actually finished is Malice by John Gwynne. It basically is set in this place called the Banished Lands. About 2,000 years ago, there was this massive clash between men and giants and all this war. Now there is relative peace, but another god war is brewing. The Black Sun and the Bright Star will rise up, and one will, of course, try to destroy man, and one will save man. So we follow a large array of characters. The main character is Corbin, who wants to be a warrior, but he's kind of a little bit of a weakling at the beginning. He's being bullied. And there is this prince who is convinced that he is the chosen one, and this other young man is following him, Veritas, and there's just a lot of main characters, a lot of perspectives. That's one of my criticisms of this book, is there's just way too many perspectives. But there's also the question of who is the chosen one, and it's always a mystery because you don't know who's the chosen one. There are a couple characters throughout this book that are convinced that they are the chosen one, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're the main villain. But it's a really fun, cool book. But yeah, way too many perspectives and a lot going on. I was very confused about who was who. The ending battle is really good. If I have time to read it, I have no problem with that, but I'm not going to prioritize this series currently just because I'm so overwhelmed with school right now, and I don't want to force myself to read something that I didn't love the first book. So those are all the books that I finished in this month. obviously, if you watched my last monthly wrap-up as well as my TBR for August, I was supposed to finish The Wheel of Time, and I'm currently still reading it, but I am about halfway done. I am 400 pages in, and there are about 800 pages. So exactly halfway done with that. That was one of the 2 books that I pulled out of my jar of books that I own. If this is your first time watching a wrap-up of mine, pretty much every month, I have started last month, I started doing this, where I pull 2 of these out and they correspond with the title on my bookshelf of books that I need to read eventually. So I'm trying to read 2 books that I own every single month. So I was supposed to read this month, but I didn't, but I will finish it next month. The main character is Rand, and he is this young boy coming from this small medieval village, and they are attacked by these horrific creatures who, it turns out, 3 of these boys, maybe more than they appear, and so this group, this fellowship, as I may say, head out and try to survive and get to safety, and it's pretty slow moving. Like, not that much is happening, but it's very enjoyable. Like, there's not tons of progress made towards like a bigger story arc, but it's a really fun fantasy book so far. And in fact, the biggest complaint I have with Malice is that it follows a whole bunch of different perspectives. This one does it well. It only follows Rand's perspective for the first almost half of the book, and now we're getting into other perspectives, but it's simply because the group is now separated a little bit. But the beginning of this book felt so much like Lord of the Rings. You have this party that's being thrown in this little village, and these boys all witness these like black riders that are around, and you have the Dark Lord, this fellowship that has been put together. Like, you even have Moraine, who is this magic users, though magic users, they're kind of suspicious of magic users, and she is kind of guiding the group exactly like Gandalf did. And especially since, like, the beginning starts in this village that kind of wants to be left alone, and it's kind of away from the real world, which is exactly what Hobbiton was in Lord of the Rings. I don't know, I'm getting heavy Lord of the Rings vibes, and I want to know if I'm the only one. This is the first book I'm going to finish next month. On my TBR, I have, I guess, a total of 5 books, because one of them is this book. The other 2 books I have to read are books I don't know much about, but they are for my book club, so I'm going to read them. The first one is Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. This is a thriller, and I'll just read you a quick description synopsis from my library. 15-year-old Ellie Mack was the perfect daughter. She was beloved by her parents. She was days away from a summer vacation, and then she was gone. Now her mother is trying to put her life back together. It's been 10 years since her daughter disappeared. Then she meets an unexpectedly charming man in a cafe. Before she knows it, she's meeting his daughters, and his youngest takes her breath away. Looking at her is like looking at Ellie. So yeah, basically thriller, I'm not sure. The next book is Cabinets of Barnaby, Maine by Elsa Hart. Elsa Hart wrote this mystery series that was set in China. I have talked about it on my channel before, but it's been a while. The first one is Jade Dragon Mountain, and I loved that book, so I bought 3 of the books. I haven't had a chance to read the other 2. I should. But she came out with a new mystery series that's set in, I believe, 18th century London. And I don't know, it looked like a really fun murder mystery like I usually like. Those are the 2 books for my book club I need to read, as well as The Wheel of Time. Now I'm going to pull 2 new names from this one. Even if I didn't finish the first book of The Wheel of Time, I keep calling it The Wheel of Time as if that's the title of the book, but it's The Eye of the World is the first book of the series. So I'm going to pick out 2 of these to see what I'm going to read next month, and I'm terrified because I can't handle that much reading. Oh, okay. All right. So I actually talked about this in the oldest books I own, but that is The Making of Wisconsin. So this is a very, very old like kids history book that I got. It basically talks about the making of Wisconsin that would probably have been taught in the schools, in elementary schools, probably 100 years ago. The good news is it's kind of a very easy children's book almost, so I'm pretty sure I can work through this relatively quickly. For the second book, oh please don't be a big one. Oh, Soul Mountain by Gao Xingjian. Okay. I didn't actually know what this was about. I got it at the Goodwill a few years back. But in 1983, Chinese playwright, critic, fiction writer, and painter Gao Xingjian was diagnosed with lung cancer and faced imminent death. But 6 weeks later, a second examination revealed there's no cancer. He had won a reprieve from death. Faced with a repressive cultural environment and threat of a spell in a prison farm, he fled Beijing and began a journey of 15,000 kilometers into the remote mountains and ancient forests of Sichuan in southwest China. The result of this epic voyage of discovery is Soul Mountain. Oh, so it's kind of an autobiography? Interesting. I mean, it definitely looks fascinating. I'm not mad about either of these books because I know The Making of Wisconsin won't take that long, and Soul Mountain looks really interesting. There are the books I'm reading next month. I'm limiting it to only 4 books and not worrying about continuing any of the series. I probably will continue and finish the High Lady Detective series, but I'm not going to make myself if I don't want to. So there are the books that I read last month, as well as the books that I'm hoping to read next month. Have you read any of these books? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for watching. I post every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a great day. Bye.